Back to Open Line here at the half hour, 7:30. Thank you for joining us once again. And if you were just joining us, I want to tell you what we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes or so. Laura Lightbody from the Pew Charitable Trust has been joining us. She has concentrated on flooding and how communities respond and prepare for it. And of course, this week marks 10 years since Nashville and Middle Tennessee experienced that historic flood that many of you lived through and still think about, I know, very often. So it's your chance to call in, ask questions that maybe have been burning for the past 10 years about why did this happen this way? Why did the city respond this way? What has the city or state done since to make sure that we never see the impact, the $2 billion impact that we experienced before? So again, if you have a question, go ahead and call in and we will get right to those. Sandra is on the line. Sandra, thank you for your patience tonight. Go ahead with your comment or question.
Yes, I'm calling in regards to sinkholes. Is there any correlation between severe flooding and the formation of sinkholes?
Oh, interesting. Okay, Laura, Sandra, I'm going to hang up on you so Laura can answer your question. You can hear it, okay?
All right.
Thank you. Go ahead, Laura.
The infrastructure of roads is certainly a big issue when it comes to flooding. That is one of the pieces of critical infrastructure that gets us to where we need to go. And so when roads floods, we can't get our kids to school, we can't get into work. Businesses are often cut off, become islands essentially. And so it is sort of critical that flooding, inundation around roads is addressed immediately. And that's a big issue that a lot of other states face when it comes to shoring up infrastructure and making sure that there are options, right? Some places have elevated roads. You can redirect roads, particularly if you're thinking about building and putting in new roads, making sure that those roads are at a higher elevation, or better yet, not in a high flood area.
Okay, Sandra, thank you so much for your call. Tell me, Laura, what other states are doing that they're getting right now that maybe we should be looking at?
Yeah, we've been really, really pleased to see that some states continue to move forward in this really challenging time. A lot of elected officials have to redirect resources right now, are cutting existing budgets from other priorities. And so we've been really pleased to see Virginia as an example of a state who just put, a governor just signed a new program that would go specifically for community preparedness. So it'll go towards things just like Nashville has done, towards buyouts, towards river restoration and floodplain restoration, shoring up the coastline in Virginia. West Virginia right now is looking at how can we make the state more resilient. Raleigh, North Carolina, moving forward with big infrastructure projects, shoring up their roads that has to do with buying out properties, really thinking holistically across different agencies that service the city, and how can we steward those resources in a time of very constrained budgets, and sort of keep our vision on the long term here, right? We can't give up on these measures because it's not raining today. And so we really need to sort of dig in, make sure that these resources are here so that we can continue to not only sort of build and rebuild after disasters, but do the proactive measures that are happening in Nashville and other cities to prepare for the next flood, so that the next time that 2010 big rain event happens with 13 inches of rain in a very short period of time, the stadium isn't flooded, the downtown isn't flooded, right? That is what is happening right now in Nashville to make sure that the city is not impacted the way that it was in 2010.
We call these 100-year floods, but is that really accurate? Should we bet on that?
That's another myth. There's a lot of flood myths, right? It's really used. It's really just kind of bad naming, but it's really just used as a percentage, much like the weather system uses percentages to predict, right? The sort of experts and meteorologists and engineers can only use predictions because they're talking about future flooding. But the fact of the matter is, if history has told us anything, every single state floods across the country almost every single year, from South Dakota to Texas, from Maine to California. And Tennessee, the majority of counties in Tennessee are often impacted by flooding. If you look at the predictions for this year, all but one county in across the state is predicted to be impacted by flooding. So it's simply something we can no longer ignore.
And on that same vein of no longer ignored, obviously the Senate's back to work in Washington right now. The House's members are still staying home, but coronavirus is grabbing the spotlight, as it should right now. But other things have to happen. So what is in front of Congress right now that they are considering and grappling with, and that you think, or at least hope, will make a difference, that will get passed?
Right. They are certainly, and as you said, very rightly so, will be focused on coronavirus for quite some time, and that will be all-consuming. But they're, one of the big things in front of them is infrastructure. Right. We're all talking about infrastructure, but that major piece of legislation is up for debate this fall, and that's really an opportunity for Congress to invest. That whole package is trillions of dollars, but really invest resources towards resiliency. So not just flooding, but all disasters, right? All natural disasters, fire, flood, tornadoes, really thinking about how can we use taxpayer dollars to build back better, or build better right the first time. So that's going to be a big priority for Congress, hopefully this fall. The National Flood Insurance Program expires this fall.
Oh, wow.
It has been, reauthorized with no changes dozens of times. And that's a program that is often, it's $20 billion in debt. It serves 5 million people across this country. And it needs fixing. It simply can't sustain itself any longer. And it serves, there are multiple homes that flood over and over and over again. And so really trying to get a handle on those properties that are also a big drain on the program. And the last one is investing in mitigation, giving states more resources and giving communities more resources to do things that shore up their communities. So whether that's increasing the stormwater management systems, it's redirecting roads, it's buying out more homes, it's expanding rivers and expanding the green space along rivers to really absorb those floodwaters. There's a large menu of options out there that communities can undertake, but are often lacking the resources to do it. And so Congress has on the table in front of them some options to really make substantial investments in mitigation, right? Flood risk reduction activities. And so we're looking forward to those three things happening, as soon as Congress is able to turn its attention to other topics.
Yeah, we'll see when that happens for sure. I do want to tell our viewers we have all of our phone lines open, 615-737+. So if you've been wanting to call in, now is a perfect time, and we can get to those questions in the next 15 minutes or so. So go ahead and give us a call, ask your question, and I know Laura will have a great answer for you. In the meantime, Laura, I wanted to touch on, you've said the word taxpayer a couple of times, and when we talk about these FEMA programs and building standards and changing things and roadway funds, even if someone doesn't live near the water, see the water, worried about a flood in any sort of way, this still impacts them.
It does. The majority of these investments that we're talking about are funded by taxpayer dollars. And so it is really important for citizens to be concerned about how that money is spent, right? So we want to make sure that if we're going to use taxpayer dollars to build a new utility, it's going to be resilient to the next flood. We're not going to pay again using taxpayer dollars to build it over and over again, right? It's sort of that vicious cycle of flood damage repair, flood damage repair. And the same thing, the flood insurance program is propped up by taxpayer dollars. And so, do we really want to continue to pay for homes over and over and over again that continue to flood? So we see this with homes, we see it with infrastructure. And so, it's important that we get a handle on that piece of things, these structures, these buildings that flood over and over again. But it's also important that we hold future dollars accountable, right? We simply cannot keep building the way that we've been doing for the past 100 years, because it's not serving communities.
Tell me more about this. Go ahead.
And that impacts, everyone who lives down at the bottom of the hill and the top of the hill, because it's a whole of community approach.
Let's go to the phone lines. We have Dino waiting. Dino, thanks for calling in. What's your question?
Yes, I've lived here through 2 Mill Creek floods, and I lived through the 2010 flood, and have really watched this city fight it over and over. What cities around the country are kind of doing this right, and how should Nashville approach this with such a limited budget?
Yeah, especially right now. That's a great question, Dino.
And I'm sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
How should Nashville approach this with such a limited budget? Right now, we have several hundred million that the mayor's trying to make up somehow. So we're tight this year. We're going to be tight for years to come. So how do we approach this? How do we do better with such a limited amount of funds?
Right. Well, there's a great study out there by the National Institute of Building Sciences, a think tank that studies these issues. And one of the economic analysis that they done was on mitigation projects. And they found that for every dollar invested in mitigation projects, so elevation, building codes, buying out homes, you see it on average a $6 return.
Wow. So
that is a big return on investment when you think about taxpayer dollars. And so when you are thinking about how city council, how the mayor, how the governor is making these decisions about investing in all of the issues that fall to the top of priorities, right? Healthcare, education, right now, a global pandemic. There are so many competing priorities. Flooding is one that impacts everyone in the state, and it is one that if we make investments now, we will see long-term savings.
Tell me about this home buying process. Who foots that bill? How is it determined? Who's going to get the offer? And are the offers negotiable? Are they fair? How are they based?
Those are all really good questions. It happens a little bit differently everywhere, but in most cases, and I know in some cases in Nashville, it's often, a combination of local, state, and or federal dollars. So a lot of federal programs have matching requirements where the city or the state required to put a certain percentage of their own money towards that. So it can mean city council voting to direct money from its, general fund. It can mean pulling revenue raised from a stormwater utility, for example. There's fees that come from that ratepayers pay that go into a fund to do big infrastructure projects. And so that money it's complicated because at the end of the day, projects don't happen because there's simply not enough money out there to do this. But it is important that when cities are able to get this money, they undertake the projects that are going to give them sort of the biggest bang for the buck. And so in Nashville, that effort around buying homes, which is voluntary, has been focused on those repetitive lost properties, those properties that have flooded over and over and over again. And that is really important because you have homeowners who simply cannot continue to live in these homes. And they often, it's often no fault of their own. A lot of these homes were built long before we had information and maps and data about flooding. And then the other piece of that is mapping, right? Making sure that we update the mapping system so we know where these flood risk areas are, and Nashville has recently done that. And so there's some good information out there. But the home buying process, it's voluntary, right? So it often takes several homeowners in a grouped community to sort of say we would like to move because we've had enough, right? This is not sustainable anymore.
What's the best?
So there's a lot of people involved.
What is the best site to go to find the flood map, so you make sure you're going to a good source?
So FEMA.gov is always sort of, stop number one. They have all of this information available to find the flood maps. You can type in your address and you can find that information.
Oh, that's great. Okay, we're going to try and squeeze in one more call here. We have Diane on the line. Diane, go ahead.
Hi, I've been a resident of Nashville for about 4 years now and a homeowner for 2, and I'm just curious, what's better to support or for infrastructure, flood walls or greener infrastructure like trees and bushes?
Interesting. What do you think, Laura?
So one of the great things we've seen in Nashville is leveraging the power of nature and reducing flood risk. So that means that, it's really simple, but we are so accustomed to, building hard structures, but really allowing nature to do what nature does best, which is absorb waters, right? We're all familiar with wetlands, right? Which is naturally just a wet function to absorb water. And so Nashville has done a good job of incorporating and mixing together green and gray infrastructure. So that can mean everything from planting more trees along easements and putting in more green space that can absorb water, as opposed to concrete or stone. Even in a home, that can make a big difference. But when you think about larger spaces, outside businesses or outside, strip malls, things like that, how to really emphasize that green space is really critical, because we've seen it work. We've seen it work time and time again. Along the coast in North Carolina after hurricanes, we saw property owners that had natural marshes and natural vegetation bode much better after those disasters than someone who put up just a concrete wall to block that water, because ultimately that water is going to go around it or it's going to destroy it. And that costs more money.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's sort of this vicious cycle, but trying to figure out ways to let nature rule is really, really the name of the game.
Interesting. Okay, we have to take a quick break. We'll come back right after this.